Welcome to a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch would ride with you on a bicycle built for two. This is Through the Pines. Our financial wizards this week include Rex Baxter, Brandyn Smith, and Dan Nelsen. And then we are joined by, do we just call you estate planning wizard, Bryce Froerer?
Just
Guru. All right, very good. So we're going to call this sort of a part two on the estate planning and trusts, and following up with what we didn't actually get to on part one. And maybe we'll start with some of the types of trusts that we didn't get to. Bryce, I think you had a list going there. So maybe there were some we missed. How are we looking?
Sure. So I think we ended the last session talking about revocable and irrevocable trusts. Again, the revocable is something that can be changed and amended as things change in your life. Irrevocable is exactly what it sounds like. You cannot change it. And those are they're not anywhere near as common as the revocable trust. When we create an estate plan for a client, it's probably 95% of the time that revocable family trust, where it changes with the changes that are in their lives. We can change the trustee, we can change the beneficiary, we can change assets. If they buy a house in St. George, or if they buy a cabin in the Tetons, or a condo in California, we can add that into the trust and keep it up to date without having to redo it over and over and over again. Other trusts that we occasionally work with are special needs trusts, bypass trusts, or AB trusts, some people call them, and then asset protection trusts. I'll talk about a bypass trust for just a few minutes. When I first started practicing back in the 90s, and I guess I'll explain it this way. Today, everybody can be worth $11.5 million before they have to pay, their estate has to pay a death tax or an estate tax. And when I started back in the 90s, that figure, that $11.5 million, was just about $300,000. And so to take advantage of as much of that benefit, or that unified credit is what it's called, we would create a bypass trust. For example, if Rex and Jenny came into my office in the 90s and they had a big farm, or they had a cabin in the woods and a condo on the beach in their house, we would have created a bypass trust so that they could take advantage of two of those unified credits, one for Rex and one for Jenny. We don't do those as often anymore, except for the very wealthy, and again, wealthy being any couple that's worth nearly or just over $11.5 million. And we do them occasionally because there are people that we help that do have a lot of money. But the most common, the common couple, the common resident of Weber and Davis County, they don't have that kind of cash or that kind of asset base unless they have huge life insurance policies. But that's why we create those bypass trusts, is to take advantage of and protect as much of their assets from being taxed by the government as we possibly can. And when I say taxed by the government, anything. So Brandyn, if you have $15 million, for example, and you die.
True statement.
Yeah, well, I thought so. Your estate could protect $11.5 million, but the other $3.5 million, which exceeds that benefit protection, would be taxed at 40%. So 1.2, what is that, Rex? You're the numbers guy. $1.5 million.
Too much is the legal
too much.
term, the technical term.
Also, Bryce, wasn't there some legislation that was trying to take nearly all of that or something? The death tax or whatever? Like, how did that? What was that?
Yeah. So again, this is a congressional driven law. And as I stated a few minutes ago, when I first started in the 90s, it was $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. In early 2000, that number was $1 million. Mid 2000, 2010, it was 10 million, and now it's 11.5 million. And so that's governed by our Congress. They set that figure. And there is some talk right now, there's some rumors that in 2025 there will be a change. Right now what we have is set to expire in 2024. And nobody knows exactly what will happen. I think that'll be kind of a measurement of the political temperature and what's going on with a lot of other things. And so I won't speculate, but there is some talk that will change. And that's another good reason to have an attorney, whether it's us or somebody else, that can stay on top of those numbers for you if you create an estate plan and you do have a lot of wealth that you want to protect.
Right. So, yeah, I just want to make sure that, so what you're saying is that if you set up a trust, then you can maybe determine where that goes rather than just handing it over to the government.
Yeah, well, and again, you can protect right now, as I said, that $11.5 million. You and your wife each could protect that much. And doing other planning, gifting, those kinds of things are certainly options that should be considered if you're one of those who does have a lot of wealth. So that's again, when we talk about an AB trust or a bypass trust, that's what we're referring to. I'll switch now to a special needs trust, and those are done infrequently as well. We have done a fair number of them. We do them when we have a client who has a disabled son or daughter, or a client who has a disabled parent, and that they want to set aside a significant amount of money to provide for their care, so that son or daughter or disabled parent doesn't lose their government benefits as a result of having assets available to them through a trust. So for example, if one of Rex's children were in an accident and needed 24-hour-a-day care, Rex could set up a special needs trust for that child, and that money would be used only for the benefit of that child and would not disqualify that child from Social Security or other governmental benefits that child might be entitled to as a result of the disability. Those are really helpful and protect assets for those of our community who are disabled, who happen to have parents or children who are able to set aside a pile of money or an income producing asset for their benefit.
So Bryce, just really quick on the special needs trust, when is the right time for somebody to set those up, as far as to have them funded and actually get a tax ID number for it and have them established? I see, sometimes I'm seeing things where they get set up and there's nothing in them. And they just sit there dormant for, 10 years, 20 years. And then all of a sudden, a life event happens, parents pass or something like that. And then the assets flow into that. But what's your opinions on when they should be established and set up and actually created, as opposed to designed and kind of the pre-work done?
I think it's a good question. I think my answer to a client would be, at the point in time when your disabled child is over 18, if you have the assets with which to do that, to set those aside for the benefit of the child, not only is it helpful to the child, but it also reduces your taxable income that would be included in your estate. So and I think Dan mentioned a few minutes ago, the funding aspect of it. That's again one of those issues that we sometimes struggle getting clients to follow through with is funding and setting aside the money, not only for a special needs trust, but also funding your individual revocable trust. And I don't know if you guys want to comment on that for a minute, and then I can share some stuff.
Yeah, we were supposed to talk about funding in the last podcast, so I didn't realize that you could have a trust, but you actually need to put stuff in it. So
I think there's a number of people that go to we through conversations or life experiences, we go to the point of getting a trust and getting the documents all together, meeting with an estate attorney, working through all that, get everything back, get everything signed, and then they take a breath and they say, okay, I got that taken care of, but they neglect or forget to go in and put their home, their accounts, all of their assets, for the most part, in that trust, which is funding it and partially funding it. And that happens a lot, I believe. And then they wait 5 or 10 years, and then they forgot that they even set up a trust, and all their assets are there, and something happens in life, and they're not protected.
Yeah, and can you double trust? Like if someone forgot, like Dan said, and then they find another attorney years down the line, I mean, where is this filed and how does that work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well. So I'm going to talk about funding, and then I'll answer your question, Brandon. On funding, when we create the trust, we will help our clients put any real estate that they have into the trust, because we can create the deed and get the deed recorded. But in terms of bank accounts or life insurance benefits, the best we can do is help them with forms, because the banks won't talk to us. In fact, Ameriprise, unless the client authorizes me, I can't even tell you that I've created a trust for a client. I have to get permission from that client to say, hey, please talk to Rex or Brandon or Dan and let them know I've done this, so that they can move my account to have it owned by my trust or transferred to my trust on my death. It's very common. We'll create a trust, or somebody will come into our office and say, hey, my mom and dad have this trust, and their house isn't in the trust. What do we do? And so then, and we didn't talk about this in the last session, but then we have to use the pour over will. We probate that house to get it into the trust. And unfortunately, that costs money and time that if we've done it right in the first place, we can avoid. So funding is a big issue that we deal with quite a bit, trying to make sure that our clients have the necessary documents, have the necessary information to properly put the assets that they have into the trust, so that when that day does come, first, their successor trustee has control over them for their benefit, and second, the successor trustee has the ability to distribute the assets according to what's outlined in the trust.
Rex?
Yeah, I think funding and titling are probably one of the biggest issues. It tends to happen and pop up almost every week for us with clients, to where or new clients, to where something comes in. This last week we're dealing with somebody, and they had participated in what's called an employee stock purchase plan, or an ESPP, to where essentially they're working for a company, and through payroll deduction they're buying stock in that company at a discounted price, and because they're buying it through the company, it gets purchased in their individual name typically. And so that goes on for years, and it's typically held at a what we call a transfer agent, not necessarily in a normal brokerage account. And so it just kind of sits over there, and it's not titled in their trust, and it's not held with most of their assets. And so then all of a sudden, when we start compiling their financial plan, and at the last second, they're like, oh yeah, I forgot, I have this. And so then we go through it, and next thing we know, it's an individual name, not even joint name, and lots of times not even a beneficiary or anything on it. And so it creates a real conundrum, if you will.
Conundrum.
About what would happen if they passed away. We also find that a lot with real estate. That lots of times, one of the spouses is involved in rental properties or involved in land, and they're doing all these deals either in their own name, in a single name, because it's easier to sign and transact business, or they're doing it in a business name, and it's not linked back to their estate plan. It's not linked back as to who owns, the LLC or something like that. And so all of that ends up going back through probate, ends up going through the pour over will, and that is a process, and it takes time, and lots of times the family is trying to get things transferred or passed on, or there may even be estate tax issues where they're having to raise money within 9 months of when somebody passes away, and then we've got to get into liquidation. At the same time, we're dealing with courts, and it really turns into a mess.
Well, Rex, I see why you work with an estate planner and attorney here. So, like, explain when you're talking to clients. Again, Rex Baxter, planwithbaxter.com. You can chat with Rex, get a hold of Rex. Like, when you're putting a financial plan together, how often do you run into someone doesn't have a trust or has a trust or needs a trust, and when is that conversation? Is that early on in the financial planning? Does it depend on how much they have, or like how does that work?
So for our team, as we're going through and bringing on new clients, things along that line, we attack that really quick. It's really high on the priority list for us. We're looking at beneficiaries and titling are two of the first things that we're looking at with clients. And if they don't have a trust, then we're having that discussion as to, why don't you have a trust? Is there a reason? How important is it to you? And we'll run through different examples, and then we'll try and loop in, somebody like Bryce. And typically we try and be in those meetings with Bryce, if at all possible, just for a number of reasons. One, it's, more heads are better than one. And lots of times we have a fairly good feel for the clients, their families, where they're headed, that sometimes they may be hesitant to bring up or not really think to bring up with Bryce, to where it's easy for us to kind of steer that conversation and make sure that everything is disclosed the way it needs to be for Bryce to do a good, comprehensive job. The worst thing can happen is somebody, keeps certain things from them, and then we've done a half job that just creates more problems than it's worth. So really early on is when we attack that, if we can.
Okay. Brandyn Smith, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're never gonna strong arm someone into a trust, right? We're not, we're not like, but I oftentimes what you find is people just don't know, right? They don't know what a trust is, why it's the pros and cons of each, and to be able to really walk someone through why you would want to have a trust. Typically, as people see those things, right, then it becomes a priority usually. Not that all priorities get accomplished right away, right? But it is something that we like to review with them, and even year after year as we're meeting to just kind of touch on that and say, hey, we still don't have that trust in place. Do we want to get that? And so it's not something we're forcing people to do, but it is usually as people understand what they are, they become a lot more open to it.
Okay, Bryce, let's go back to have you seen where is this filed? Can you double trust or whatever? How does that work? And then what can go in trusts? Farms, LLCs, S-Corps. What about nonprofits? Can you throw that into some sort of a trust?
I've never had anybody that owns or is involved in a nonprofit put that into a trust, but there's no reason you couldn't. To answer your question, I was going to come back to, can you have more than one trust? And I'll give you the example. Last year in November, I had a client come in that he owned his home, had some money in the bank, had some investment property and some recreational property. And he wanted to treat the recreational property differently than the investment property, and those differently than his house. And so we ended up creating 3 different trusts for him, because he wanted those, when that day comes that he passes away, he wanted those distributed differently. One of them, he wanted to remain, that property was to remain in the trust for a period of time after his death for the benefit of his children to use it for their recreation. And so, you can have multiple trusts. That can become a problem if if when you have your trust created, you don't designate the date of the trust. And so when, for example, when we create a trust for a family, for a couple, we'll say, all right, we're transferring your property into the Brandyn Long trust dated February 2nd, 2022, because last week Brandyn did another trust in January, on January 28th, and he put something else in that trust. And so we distinguish the assets that are in the particular trust we're talking about.
I'm just trying to get you paid, Bryce. I'll do a trust a week if you want. Yeah.
That works. We would probably start questioning your
My motives.
your
Sanity.
Yeah, that too.
capacity. Yeah, there's the word. So you mentioned LLCs and corporations, and Rex had also mentioned that. As part of the trust, yeah, we want those business interests owned by the trust, because primarily, again, if you become incapacitated, your successor trustee can then manage those assets, that LLC or that stock for your benefit, or the account at Ameriprise for your benefit. And the trust, as you pass away, can then designate who gets that. I have a lot of clients who have a small business and they work with a son or a daughter, and they'll say, look, this business, I want to go to that child who's been working there with me. And so we don't treat it like we would a bank account of $10,000 where everybody gets their share. We would say this particular child who's been working with dad or with mom is going to get that business interest for part of their share. It's really quite easy to do that. We don't have to have the stock certificate in the name of the trust. We can, but we generally don't. We just make an assignment. It's a document where we say, as for my 30% interest in Brandyn Long LLC, I want that in my trust. We sign it, date it. That takes care of it.
That does have a nice ring to it, so I think we should probably make that happen.
We create one of those for you.
Yeah, I like that.
Easy to do.
Easy. Did we talk about funding enough? Should we cover more of how to fund it, or making sure it's funded?
I think we have talked. The issue, again, well, I'll say this: that's one of the issues that comes up that ends up causing the need to probate an estate, is because we have not properly funded the trust. Whether it's a bank account or a piece of real estate, those are the two things that we often see. And I don't know, Rex, that's probably your experience as well, but those are the two assets that if we don't get them named as either owner of the trust or beneficiary to the trust, those create probate court problems for us.
Just to clarify, Bryce, so funding doesn't mean you're putting money into a trust. It means you're designating an asset into the trust.
So for example, Rex, I'll let you hit that one.
Yeah, let's just define what funding means, right?
Yeah.
You're just changing it actually is fairly simple. You're just changing title. And so instead of something owned by Brandyn Long, such as the house, we're gonna go down, record a deed, and now it's gonna be titled, owned by the Brandyn Long Trust, and then that house is now funded the trust. It's now in the trust. Same with the brokerage account. Instead of a Brandyn Long brokerage account, it's now going to be the Brandyn Long Family Trust brokerage account with Brandyn Long as trustee, and now it's funded. And so when we talk about titling and funding, we're saying that you need to change the title from individual name or joint name into the name of the trust is what needs to happen. And it's really as fairly simple as that. Some of the most common things I see are certainly bank accounts and brokerage accounts. And I actually see a lot of real estate too. For some reason, a lot of attorneys out there don't prepare the deeds and don't do the transfer of title on the real estate. They'll generate the trust. They'll give the client a list of things to do on page 97 of a big long book, and the client forgets about it and then doesn't change any of the ownership.
Yeah, no.
So they paid all this money and nothing happened.
No, that's super interesting, Bryce. So we'll just walk through the process real quick. So we come see you, and I can just imagine an attorney filling out all the paperwork, and it's like, here is your trust, Mr. Long, and then you take it home, and you're like, I'm done. I don't have to do anything. But there's some stuff on page 8 you should probably take care of. Like, how do you follow up on that to make sure it gets funded? I'm sure that happens in your industry. I mean, but I don't know.
All the time. Yeah, all the time. So I'll use real estate as an example. When we create a trust for Brandon Long, we will create the deed to Brandon Long's house, and we will record that deed unless there's a really good reason not to, and there's usually not a good reason not to record the deed. So we help fund that trust. We also provide, we'll sit down with the client with regard to, for example, life insurance policies. We'll help them get the change of beneficiary form from the life insurance company and sit down with them and complete that form so that can be mailed to the life insurance company. And when that event, that death happens, the benefits will be paid to the trust so that's taken care of. Bank accounts are a little more interesting in that we can name the trust as the owner, or we can name the trust payable on death. And I find that that's more what people like to do. And what that means is, if I have a bank account at America First Credit Union, and I indicate on my account there that I want it to be payable on death to my trust, when I die, my sons can take my death certificate to America First Credit Union, and they will say, oh, Bryce listed this account as payable on death to the Bryce Froerer Trust. It will now pay those benefits or those assets to them as trustees. Rex, how do you handle Ameriprise with a funding process?
Yeah, so we handle it very similarly, right? As if we like to title it into the name of the trust instead of payable on death or transfer on death to the trust. Just because the problem with payable on death or transfer on death is if you become incapacitated, then it's not titled in the trust. And so then you've got to go back and rely on the power of attorney. A lot of financial institutions prefer, even though they'll with a fair amount of red tape, they'll recognize an outside power of attorney, but they really prefer their own power of attorney paperwork, most financial institutions. And most people don't do that. They think, oh, I've already got the power of attorney with Bryce. I don't need to do yours. And although technically that's probably true, it just takes longer to get it through the red tape of the different financial institutions. And so because of that, we feel fairly strongly that we want it titled into the name of the trust.
Rex, can I ask another question, Brandon? Sorry. I always struggle with 401k IRA type assets. Do you recommend those be the beneficiaries of those be the trust, or should they be the spouse or the children?
So that's always a great question, and we get that a lot. And it's interesting because different attorneys have fairly strong opinions one way or the other on beneficiaries. Generally speaking, there was a law change here, a year ago, Brandon, probably something like that, with the Secure Act, to where, if it's individual beneficiaries on a retirement account, non-spouse, so it's going to kids or somebody else, then you have up to 10 years to withdraw the funds from that retirement account. Whereas if it's a trust, you have 5 years to distribute it from a retirement account. And so you can imagine if you have $1 million in a 401k plan, or $2 million or something like that in an IRA, having to pull it out over 5 years versus 10 years can jump you up a tax bracket or two. And so we prefer to have the individuals listed. That being said, there are certainly a fair amount of situations where we prefer to have the trust. If we have a spend happy child in the family, then we like it to be controlled by the trust. If we're dealing with a
child who has an addiction or something like that,
right? Any of those things, an addiction or their special needs, right, then we want to make sure that the trust is the beneficiary. And so there's a number of situations that we could list off where we do want the trust. So it's not a blanket answer as to it should always be X. Brandon Long, what's our favorite answer that you absolutely love?
Hashtag it depends. It depends.
Exactly. So it depends on the situation as to what we're going to put. So
Brandon, jump in here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this is the beauty of and really the genius of a trust is I don't own my own home, right? Like it's literally not titled in my name. It's titled in the name of my trust. And so if I want to make a change to my home or do something, right, that I legally need to do with it, sell it, whatever that is, I can do that because I am a trustee on that trust, right? I have legal authority, myself and my wife have legal authority to do it. But do I own it? No, I don't. The trust does. And so if I die and I own something, the courts are going to have to redistribute it. If I die and my trust owns it, my trust still stands, right? And so then you go to who are the trustees, who can make decisions. Well, he's died and she's died. Who's left? Well, he put contingent, successor trustees that can then make decisions. And so my home it's never in question who's going to own it next because the trust owns it, and I've appointed people who can make decisions based on the ownership, based on the trust. Same thing with my my non-qualified investment account. If I die, I don't own it, right? It's not mine, it's my trust's, but I am the one who is appointed because I appointed myself. No conflict of interest, just kidding. I appointed myself to make all the decisions on that trust. If myself and my wife have passed away, then I've appointed someone else who can make those decisions. So no judge ever has to go and look at my stuff and look at how I've put everything and say, I think so-and-so should be in charge and sign off on it. I've already put it in an entity that is self-standing, self-existing, and I've put in my list of people who I want to take control of that, if I'm not here. And I think that in a nutshell is what a trust is all about.
Okay, so I recently heard that if you really want to reach a goal, you have to look at the negative. It's like reverse psychology. So this is how it was explained. If you want to lose weight, for instance, you have to imagine yourself 6 months from now without a pound lost. Would you be happy? And that is more of a motivator than if you're looking at like chiseled bodies that you want to have. Because if you can imagine the worst case scenario, you're more likely to act. So Bryce, if I have a home with my wife and I do not have a trust, how bad does it get? And I die, we both die somehow, and we've got kids. What happens to the home? How bad does it get?
So that's a good question. So using your example, if your home is owned by you and your wife and you have children and you both die, somebody would have to be designated as your personal representative through the probate process, through court. And then that person would have to, if you have minor children, they would hold on to those assets until your children turned 18, at which time your children would receive their share of whatever you had. And that should be enough to scare people to say, hey, I don't want my 18-year-old son to get anything because they'll go out and buy a car.
And how does the court decide who that person is until the kids are old enough?
So if you've created just a simple will, you designate who that is. If you haven't done any planning, somebody has to say, oh, I'll do it. I'll do it for Brandon. He's died. He's my brother. He's my friend. He owes me money. I'll do it. I'll take care of that. That's not a pleasant experience. Because you haven't done anything to control.
Yeah, I have no control.
In charge. Yeah.
Okay.
So what? Carry that through, Bryce, for a second. Let's say Brandon passes. Let's say he has 3 kids. He died intestate, meaning without a will or a trust or anything else, and he's got this house. Kids turn 18, and so my guess is that they would each own 1/3 of the property in tenants in common, probably.
Wait, they all turn 18 at the same time, or how does that work?
Well, yeah, so they don't. So let's say that they turn 18 over a year. So one gets on there, but then the personal representative starts to protect it for the other 2. So when the last one turns 18, all three are on the house, and let's say middle child wants his money. How does that work?
So,
That's a good question.
I think that the house probably would be sold to take care of the children, and that money would just sit in an account. And as they turn 18, they would get their third. In the event that they did, let's say they were all over 18 when Brandon and his wife passed away, then yeah, they would all be a 1/3 owner as tenants in common of that house. And if one of them wanted their share, they would have to go to court and ask the judge to force a sale. In that scenario, the court probably would say, yeah, we're not going to have this just sitting. Sell that asset so that you three can do with what you want, your shares.
Yeah, and interesting. So, I mean, it really does get messy in those kinds of situations if you don't have, at least a will, certainly, but probably a will and a trust. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no. Okay, should we bump forward? Are we ready to move into?
Yeah, so Brandon, let's talk about asset protection trust, Medicare, Medicaid for a minute.
Okay.
Occasionally, 3 or 4 times a year, I'll have an older client come in with a son or a daughter and say, you know what, I'm afraid that I'm going to end up in a care facility, and so I want to transfer my house to my son or my daughter so that they get something, so that they inherit something. And to me, that's a little bit dangerous on the part of the senior client, the elderly client, the mother or the father, because again, they lose control of the house. They lose control of that asset. And so an alternative to that is an asset protection trust, where we would transfer that property into, for example, we would call it the Brandon Long Asset Protection Trust, with Brandon as the grantor and Rex as the trustee. And Brandon would be the beneficiary, but Rex would control the asset. And hypothetically, if Brandon ended up disabled and needed to go into a care facility, if we've transferred that asset 5 years before, Rex would not have to use that asset for his care. We would be able to protect that asset for the beneficiaries designated in the trust. Social Security is I'll be more specific. There's Medicare and there's Medicaid, right? So everybody, as we turn 62, 65, we're entitled to be on Medicare. That's the government insurance plan for our elderly and our very young and very, very poor. Medicaid, on the other hand, is the government plan for long-term care, meaning that if you don't have any assets and you can't take care of yourself because you're mentally disabled, or you've got Alzheimer's or dementia, or you're just not capable of providing for your care, the government will allow you to go into a care facility and cover those expenses for you. That's part of what we pay taxes for. A lot of people, not a lot, some people want to avoid having to pay that cost out of their pockets for their long-term care because it's expensive. Rex, what's the typical cost for a month at a care facility?
So in Utah right now, it's about $5,000 for a basic cost, and then if you're needing skilled nursing and things like that, then it's on top of that. And so I've seen it typically range anywhere from 5,000 to maybe 8 in the state of Utah, somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
per month.
Per month.
Yeah, per month.
You can blow through a small savings account pretty quickly. So I'll give you the example that we do, and it's usually a house. Clients will come in and say, you know what, I want to put this in an asset protection trust so that if I do end up in a care facility, Medicaid will cover that cost and my kids will end up with something. The kicker or the caveat there is that we have to do that. If Brandon, if you came into me and said, I want to create an asset protection trust in 2022, you have to live till 2027 before you can go into that care facility, because Medicaid has a 5-year look back to say, hey, if you transferred anything out of your control in the last 5 years, we're going to go grab that and use that for your care. So they're not super common, but they are used occasionally.
Yeah. Bryce, this is a little, I'm just curious. I want to know how you stay on top of all of this. It seems like there's a lot, and then laws change, different things change. How do you stay in the game? I know this is your job, it's what you do, but if you're busy working with clients on the side, where do you find the time to like stay up on all the things?
And I guess I say in our office there's 5 of us, and we all try to bounce ideas and bounce different scenarios off of each other to try and keep up on it. We also, as attorneys, we're obligated to keep up to date on in the areas of practice that we work in, and we call the continuing legal education is what it's called. We're all attorneys are supposed to complete 24 hours of continuing legal education every 2 years, and so when I have to take one of those CLE classes, I usually focus on estate planning or on family law, so that I can stay up on these kinds of questions. And I don't profess to be an expert on all of the trusts. I mean, we talk about the T-crats and the grats and the crats and the clats and the
It's like a Dr. Seuss book.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And yes, those are options. And we've done some of that, but rarely do we do those kinds of trusts, because those kinds of trusts, they're all typically done with the ultra wealthy who want a tax deduction. So they set aside money for a charity that's paid through a trust, and they get a tax deduction or something like that. And so if I had a client come in and say, hey, I've got these many millions of dollars, and what can we do about it? We know enough people who do work in those areas. We would bring them in to help us out. The other thing I'll say about your question is, it's a lot like taxes. I know enough to know that I don't know enough. And so when I have a tax question, I'm going to go to a CPA. And when I have an investment question, I don't know enough about that. That's why I use Rex and his team, because they have those answers. And Rex is great to, if I have a client that's got money that he doesn't know or she doesn't know what to do with it, I say, look, let me have you talk to Rex or one of the members of his team, because they're low pressure and they're going to help you and give you options and help you feel like you're part of what you're doing here, instead of saying, this is exactly what you need and this is why we're going to put it there for you. Rex lets them be part of the discussion.
Yeah, I feel bad for my CPA. It's like getting a master's degree every year because they change so many laws. Brandon, do you have some more numbers?
You bet.
I don't.
So this is kind of interesting. In December 31st, 2018, about 3 years ago, there were 1.53 million homes for sale in our nation. That's not a lot. 1.53 million homes for the entire nation 3 years ago.
Okay.
That has decreased. So that this is as of November 30th, 2021. So 3 years later, just a couple months ago, there were only 1.11 million homes available, according to the National Association of Realtors. It's crazy how thin the housing market.
Well, I saw Utah was up like 33%, and we're pretty much leading the nation right now. I don't know if that was a true number, but it's high. And then also I saw a pretty funny meme where I don't know if you've ever cooked spinach, but there was like the non-cooked spinach and the cooked spinach where it's like shrunk down, and the non-cooked spinach was all the people looking for a house, and the cooked spinach where it's like nothing, where the house is available on the market. Like there's nothing there. So it's super competitive right now. So when you get your house,
that's an interesting number though, to go from, down 30% in inventory over the last 3 years, when even in 2018, 1.5 million houses for sale across the entire United States is historically extremely thin, extremely low.
Yeah.
And so we've just gone through from low to ultra thin.
We need ultra thin. We need builders. We need the builders got to get on their game, because there's just not enough out there right now. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate that.
You bet.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Bryce, do you want to get into any of these T-crats, G-rat, crat, clat, oh my stuff? I don't know what is this stuff. He's all no.
I can tell you, a charitable remainder trust. It's a trust that, again, if people want to leave an asset to a charity and get a tax deduction, it's an option that they can use. Same with a CLAT, a charitable lead annuity trust. A CRAD is a charitable remainder annuity trust. They're all different trusts that are not used frequently.
Yeah.
That are used for charitable benefits, donations to universities, donations to hospitals, those kinds of things. I don't know, Rex, do you ever use those kinds of things with Ameriprise? You ever see those?
So we used to use some of them a lot more before some of the tax law changes, like the grantor retained annuity trust, or the GRATs, because we could discount real estate and different things as we would kind of put them in. And so we could kind of peg a price in real estate, put it in, gift real estate at lower values to kids, and therefore kind of expedite the passing of assets between generations. And so we used to be able to do a lot more of those here about 10 years ago, but some of the laws have kind of cracked down on some of those things. But with some of our wealthier clients, we certainly still see some of those things, especially those that are charitably inclined. And so whether it's sometimes people want to make sure that their charity gets their money first, and then the kids get their money second. And there's ways to avoid taxes, estate taxes. So if you have an estate that's 30 million or 40 million or something like that, we're trying to avoid that 40% estate tax. Then we can sometimes do a charitable lead or a charitable remainder annuity trust that's testamentary, and we can zero out the tax impact of that by giving that gift to charity over time, and then everything that's remaining in that trust, because we had that tax deduction, passes on to your heirs. And so these are certainly complex and fairly rare techniques that we use with our wealthiest clients. But we have actually, between Bryce's group, between the Ameriprise, we have a specialized financial planning group made up with attorneys as well. And then obviously that's one of our strengths for our team, is estate planning as well, I would say. And so when you put all of our heads together, generally we can come up with fairly good solutions up and down the asset ladder of wherever your family is at, whether we're looking at a regular family revocable trust, all the way up to the most complex trusts that are out there.
Dan, jump in on here.
When I've seen this over the years, it usually does have some characteristics of a certain type of a client. It's usually the ultra wealthy, first of all. It usually is a combined family, could be second or a third marriage, kids from different places, kids in different stages of life, all the way from really having a hard time with life to very wealthy and successful. And it usually, oftentimes, it has to do with a lot of real estate, and it has to do with the current estate laws and what the number is at a certain point in time. Like Bryce said, back in the 80s, it was a very small number. Now 11 million. But if you've got a 40 or 50 million dollar estate, and you have a certain charity or two or three charities that you care a great deal about, and I've seen situations where some people care a great deal about those charities much more than they do some of their kids, unfortunately. those come into play, and people do use certain types of trusts to reduce the estate tax.
Interesting. All right, Bryce. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure having you on. I loved all this information. What did we miss in 2 hours? If you didn't catch the first episode, 2 hours of trust and estate planning, and I feel like we could actually go another hour. But we have to cut it off. We have to end it at some point. So, Bryce, what did we not cover? Anything?
I guess I would say, and I'll ask Rex to weigh in here too. We talked about divorce, but what we didn't talk about is a blended family. And when I get divorced and then I remarry, what do I do about my estate planning and my children and her children and our children? And that is one of the really nice things about a trust is we can be really specific about, look, when I die, my kids are going to get A, B, and C, and her kids are going to get E, F, and G, and our kids are going to get E, D, H, and I, right? We can fashion it such that we don't have to exclude anybody's kids, and we do a lot of that. There's a lot of second marriages and third marriages, and I'll ask Rex to weigh in on that as well. I'm sure you see that probably not weekly, but pretty often.
No, but plenty frequently. And when you talk about upset families and hard feelings, that's lots of times exponential on blended families, because there's additional emotions and sometimes resentment that resides in there. And so the more clear that you can make it, which is it's always interesting that people still think that the trusts are just for the rich and just to avoid taxes. And that's probably the biggest myth. If we were going to dispel one myth, that's probably the biggest myth that we need to dispel is trusts really are an amazing tool to be able to spell out who gets what when, to go back to that. And you can control that. You can control the who, you can control the what, and you can control the when. And that works great with blended families. It works great that you can write in, different pieces of divorce if you need to, and so there's just a lot of pieces that you can write in, special needs trusts if you have, a young autistic son or something like that, that is high functioning now, but you're not sure where they might be later. Then you can kind of write that in, and you can spell that out with language. You can protect the assets from being used for, if you're against drug use or against different things like that, then you can write that into the trust, and you can kind of control, different things that need to be going on in order for them to have access to those funds, so that you don't continue to allow people to spiral downhill with larger bank accounts upon that inheritance. So I think, they're important, and they're an important part of an estate plan. So,
yeah,
I agree.
Bryce, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure and nice to work with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I genuinely appreciate having you all on. I always learn so much every time we do these podcasts. So again, to get in touch with any of the fine gentlemen here, we did have Bryce's information scrolling. Let's scroll that there. It's at the bottom of the screen. Give him a call, 801-621-2690, or hit the website up. It's FroerandMiles.com. So you can search Bryce Froerer probably on all the things and find him as well. And then Rex and Brandyn and Dan Nelsen is planwithbaxter.com for all of your financial planning needs. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.